The Gold of the Gods by Erich von Daniken. Narrated by Danny Campbell. Copyright 1972 by Erich von Daniken. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with the John W. White Literary Agency and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Keep listening after The Gold of the Gods for a bonus interview with author Erich von Daniken. 1. The Gold of the Gods. To me, this is the most incredible, fantastic story of the century. It could easily have come straight from the realms of science fiction if I had not seen and photographed the incredible truth in person. What I saw was not the product of dreams or imagination. It was real and tangible. A gigantic system of tunnels, thousands of miles in length and built by unknown constructors at some unknown date, lies hidden deep below the South American continent. Hundreds of miles of underground passages have already been explored and measured in Ecuador and Peru. That is only a beginning. Yet the world knows nothing about it. On July 21, 1969, Juan Marix, an Argentine subject, deposited a legal title deed signed by several witnesses with Dr. Gustavo Falconi, a notary in Guayaquil. The deed sets out Marix's claim to be the discoverer of the tunnels, as far as the Republic of Ecuador and posterity are concerned. I had this document, which was written in Spanish, translated by a UN interpreter. I quote the most important parts of it at the beginning of this incredible story of mine. Juan Marix, Argentine citizen by naturalization, born in Hungary, passport number 4361689. I have discovered objects of great cultural and historical value to mankind in the province of Morona Santiago, within the boundaries of the Republic of Ecuador. The objects consist mainly of metal plaques inscribed with what is probably a resume of the history of a lost civilization, the very existence of which was unsuspected by mankind hitherto. The objects are distributed among various caves, and are of many different kinds. I was able to make my discovery in fortunate circumstances. In my capacity as a scholar, I was carrying out research into the folklore and ethnological and linguistic aspects of Ecuadorian tribes. The objects I found are of the following kinds. 1. Stone and metal objects of different sizes and colors. 2. Metal plaques, leaves, engraved with signs and writing. These form a veritable metal library, which might contain a synopsis of the history of humanity, as well as an account of the origin of mankind on Earth, and information about a vanished civilization. The fact of my discovery has made me the legal owner of the metal plaques and other objects in accordance with Article 665 of the Civil Code. However, as I am convinced that the objects, which were not found on my own land, are of incalculable cultural value, I refer to Article 666, according to which the treasure I discovered remains my personal property, but subject to state control. I beg you, most excellent President of the Republic, to appoint a scientific commission to verify the contents of this document and assess the value of the finds. I am prepared to show such a commission the exact geographical position and site of the entrance, as well as the objects I have discovered so far. Marix stumbled on the underground passages in June 1965 during his research work, in which he was ably assisted by Peruvian Indians who acted as skillful intermediaries between him and their tricky fellow tribesmen. Being cautious by nature and skeptical as befitting a scholar, he kept silent for 3 years. Not until he had covered many miles of underground passages and found all kinds of remarkable objects did he ask President Velasco Ibarra for an audience in the spring of 1968. But the president of a country in which nearly all his predecessors had been deposed by rebellions before the expiry of their term of office had no time for this lone wolf with this incredible tale of discovery. The palace flunkies found the obstinate archaeologist very charming, and assured him, after long delays, that the president would be glad to receive him in a few months' time, but Maurice was finally told he could not have an audience until 1969. Disillusioned and embittered, he withdrew to his subterranean retreat. I first met Juan Maurice on March 4, 1972. His lawyer, Dr. Peña Matius of Guayaquil, had been trying to get in touch with him by telegram and telephone for 2 whole days. I had settled down in Dr. Peña's office with plenty to read, somewhat nervous, I must admit, because according to all reports, Maurice was a very difficult man to approach, and had a deep aversion to anyone connected with the writing profession. Finally, one of the telegrams reached him. He telephoned me. He knew my books. "I don't mind talking to you," he said. On the night of March 4th, he stood there, a wiry, deeply tanned man in his mid-40s with gray hair. He is one of those men who has to be drawn out, because he himself is anything but talkative. My vehement, insistent questions amused him. Gradually, he began to give a factual and very expressive description of his tunnels. "I can't believe it," I cried. "Nevertheless, it's just as he says," said Dr. Peña. "I've seen it all with my own eyes." Maurice invited me to visit the caves. Maurice, Franz Zeiner, my traveling companion, and I climbed into a Toyota Jeep. During the 24-hour drive to the site, we took turns at the wheel. Before we entered the caves, we took the precaution of having a good sleep. When the dawn sky announced the advent of a hot day, our adventure began. The entrance, cut in the rock and wide as a barn door, is situated in the province of Morona Santiago, in the triangle formed by Walaquiza, San Antonio, Yaupi, a region inhabited by hostile Indians. Suddenly, from one step to another, broad daylight changed to pitch darkness. Birds fluttered past our heads. We felt the draft they created and shrank back. We switched on our torches and the lamps on our helmets, and there in front of us was the gaping hole which led down into the depths. We slid down a rope to the first platform, 250 feet below the surface. From there we made 2 further descents of 250 feet. Then our visit to the age-old underworld of a strange, unknown race really began. The passages all form perfect right angles. Sometimes they are narrow, sometimes wide. The walls are smooth and often seem to be polished. The ceilings are flat and at times look as if they were covered with a kind of glaze. Obviously, these passages did not originate from natural causes. They looked more like contemporary air raid shelters. As I was feeling and examining ceilings and walls, I burst out laughing, and the sound echoed through the tunnels. Maurice shone his torch on my face. "What's wrong? Have you gone crazy?" I'd like to see the archaeologist with the nerve to tell me that this work was done with hand axes. My doubts about the existence of the underground tunnels vanished as if by magic, and I felt tremendously happy. Maurice said that passages like those through which we were going extended for hundreds of miles under the soil of Ecuador and Peru. "Now we turn off to the right," called Maurice. We stood at the entrance to a hall as big as the hangar of a jumbo jet. It could have been a distribution center or a storeroom, I thought. Galleries leading in different directions branched off it. When I tried to use my compass to find out where they led, it went on strike. I shook it, but the needle did not move. Maurice watched me. "It's no use. There is radiation down here that makes it impossible to get a compass bearing. I don't know anything about the radiation. I have only observed it. It's really a job for physicists." On the threshold of a side passage, a skeleton lay on the ground. It looked as if a doctor had carefully prepared it for an anatomy lesson, but in addition had sprayed it all over with gold dust. The bones gleamed in the light of our torches like solid gold. Maurice told us to switch off our torches and follow him slowly. It was very quiet. All I could hear was our footsteps, our breathing, and the whir of the birds, to which we rapidly grew accustomed. The darkness was blacker than the darkest night. "Switch on your torches!" shouted Mariks. We were standing dumbfounded and amazed in the middle of a gigantic hall. Mariks, the proud discoverer, had prepared the effect as cleverly as the citizens of Brussels, who use the same trick when confronting foreign tourists with their grand place, perhaps the most beautiful square in the world. This nameless hall into which the seventh passage leads is intimidatingly large, but very beautiful and nobly proportioned. We were told that the ground plan measures 153 by 164 yards. It went through my mind that these were almost the dimensions of the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan, and that in both cases no one knows who the builders, the brilliant technicians, were. There was a table in the middle of the room. Was it really a table? Presumably, for there were 7 chairs along one side. Were they chairs? Apparently they were. Stone chairs? No, they did not have the same cold feeling as stone. Were they made of wood? Definitely not. Wood would never have lasted for thousands of years. Were they made of metal? I did not think so. They felt like some kind of plastic, but they were as hard and heavy as steel. There were animals behind the chairs: saurians, elephants, lions, crocodiles, jaguars, camels, bears, monkeys, bison, and wolves, with snails and crabs crawling about between them. Apparently they had been cast in molds, and there was no logical sequence about their arrangement. They were not in pairs, as is usual in pictures of Noah's Ark. They were not arranged by species, as zoologists prefer. Nor were they in the hierarchical order of natural evolution used by biologists. They simply stood there peacefully, as if the laws of nature did not apply. The whole thing was like a fantastic zoo, and what is more, all the animals were made of solid metal. Also in this hall was the most precious treasure of all, the metal library mentioned in the notarial title deed, although I could never have guessed what it was really like from reading about it. The library of metal plaques was opposite the zoo, to the left of the conference table. It consisted partly of actual plaques and partly of metal leaves only millimeters thick. Most of them measured about 3 feet 2 inches by 1 foot 7 inches. After a long and critical examination, I still could not make out what material had been used in their manufacture. It must have been unusual, for the leaves stood upright without buckling, in spite of their size and thinness. They were placed next to each other like bound pages of giant folios. Each leaf had writing on it, stamped and printed regularly as if by a machine. So far, Mariks has not managed to count the pages of his metal library, but I accept his estimate that there might be 2,000 or 3,000. The characters on the metal plaques are unknown, but if only the appropriate scholars were told of the existence of this unique find now, I am sure that they could be deciphered comparatively quickly in view of the wealth of possibilities for comparison. No matter who the creator of this library was, nor when he lived, this great unknown was not only master of a technique for the mass production of metal folios in vast numbers, the proof is there. He also had written characters with which he wanted to convey important information to beings in a distant future. This metal library was created to outlast the ages, to remain legible for eternity. Time will show whether our own age is seriously interested in discovering such fantastic, awe-inspiring secrets. Is it prepared to decipher an age-old work, even if it means bringing to light truths that might turn our neat but dubious world picture completely upside down? Do not the high priests of all religions ultimately abhor revelations about prehistory that might replace belief in the creation by knowledge of the creation? Is man really prepared to admit that the history of his origin was entirely different from the one which is instilled into him in the form of a pious fairy story? Are prehistorians really seeking the unvarnished truth without prejudice and partiality? No one likes to fall off a skyscraper he has built himself. The walls and passages of the tunnel system were bare. There were no paintings like those in the deep burial chambers in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, no reliefs of the kind found in prehistoric caves at sites all over the world. Instead, there were stone figures which we bumped into at every step. Marique's owns a stone amulet 4.5 inches high and 2.5 inches wide. The obverse is engraved with a being with a hexagonal body and round head that might have been drawn by a child. The figure holds the moon in its right hand and the sun in its left hand. Admittedly, this is not particularly surprising, but it stands with both feet firmly on the terrestrial globe. Surely that is a clear proof that even in times when the first primitive drawings were scratched on stone, a chosen few of our first ancestors already knew that we lived on a globe. The reverse shows a half-moon and the radiant sun. Without any doubt, this stone amulet found in the tunnels seems to me to be a proof that they were already in existence in the Middle Paleolithic, 9,000 to 4,000 BC. There is another engraving on a stone plaque, 11.5 inches high and 1 foot 8.5 inches wide, this time depicting an animal. I suspect that it is a representation of a dinosaur. This extinct prehistoric animal moved on land with the help of long hind legs, as shown in the engraving. Even its gigantic size, dinosaurs were as much as 65 feet long, can still be sensed in the foreshortened squat version of the body, and the feet with 3 toes strengthen my suspicion. If my identification of this picture is correct, it'll be most uncanny. This extinct reptile lived in the Earth's Middle Ages during the Upper Cretaceous, i.e. 135 million years ago, when the modern continents began to assume their present configuration. I am not going to speculate any further. I simply ask this question: what intelligent thinking being ever saw a saurian? In front of us lay the skeleton of a man, carved out of stone. I counted 10 pairs of ribs, all anatomically accurate. In an office, I beg your pardon, a square stone room, Marique's showed me a dome. Figures with dark faces stood like guards around its circumference. They had hats on their heads and held spear-like objects in their hands, as if they were ready to defend themselves. Figures flew or floated through the air near the top of the dome. By the light of my torch, I discovered a skeleton crouched behind the Romanesque entrance to the dome. It did not shock me, but what did shock me was the model of a dome. Heinrich Schliemann discovered the first dome when he excavated Mycenae, a fortress and town in the northeast Peloponnese, from 1874 to 1876, and that dome was supposed to have been built by the Achaeans at the end of the 14th century BC. I actually learned at school that the Pantheon in Rome, built in Hadrian's reign between AD 120 and 125, was the first dome, but from now on I shall consider this piece of stonework as the oldest example of a dome. A clown with a bulbous nose knelt on a stone plinth. The little fellow sported a helmet that covered his ears. Earphones like those on our telephones were attached to the lobes of his ears. A ring in relief, with a diameter of 2 inches and 2/5 inch thick, was stuck to the front of the helmet. It was fitted with 15 holes, which seemed to be admirably adapted for fitting plugs into. A chain hung around his neck, and it too had a ring with a number of holes in it, like those we use for dialing telephone numbers. Other remarkable features were the spacesuit accessories on the suit that the gnome wore, and the gloves, in which his fingers were well protected against dangerous contacts. I would not have paid any attention to a winged mother figure between whose arms knelt a slit-eyed child in a crash helmet if I had not seen the identical figure, though in clay, during a visit to the American Museum in Madrid. Whole books could and will be written about these tunnels and their treasures. Among many other things, they will mention the 6-feet-high stonemason's works, representing beings with 3 and 7 heads, the triangular plaques, with writing on them as if schoolchildren had been making their first attempts at writing, dice with geometrical figures on their 6-plane surfaces, the piece of soapstone, 3 feet 8 inches long and 9 1/4 inches wide, which is curved like a boomerang and covered with stars, etc. No one knows who built the tunnels. No one knows the sculptors who left behind these strange, ambiguous works. Only one thing seems clear to me. The tunnel builders were not the same men as the stonemasons. Their stark, practical passages were obviously not meant to be decorated. Perhaps they showed the underground vaults to a chosen group, and the latter fashioned in stone things they had seen and heard, and stored the results in the depths. So far, the entrance to this underground treasure trove of human history is known only to a few trustworthy people, and it is guarded by a wild Indian tribe. Indians lurk unseen in the undergrowth and watch every movement made by strangers. Mariques has been accepted as a friend by the chieftain of the cave guardians and 3 members of the tribe who are occasionally in contact with civilization. Once a year at the beginning of spring, on March 21st, the chieftain climbs down alone to the first platform in the underworld to offer ritual prayers. Both his cheeks bear the same signs as are marked in the rock at the entrance to the tunnels. To this day, the tribe of tunnel guardians still make masks and carvings of men with long noses, gas masks, and they tell, as Mariques knows, of the heroic deeds of the flying beings who once came from heaven. But the Indians will not go into the tunnels for love or money. "No, no," they said to Mariques, "spirits live down there." But it is a remarkable fact that Indian chiefs occasionally use gold to pay the debts they have incurred with the civilized world, or present friends who have rendered their tribe a service with precious gold objects from their 500-year-old past. On several occasions Mariques had stopped me taking photographs as we passed through the tunnels. He kept on making different excuses. Sometimes it was the radiation that would make the negatives unusable. Sometimes it was the flash that might damage the metal library with its blinding light. At first I could not understand why, but after a few hours underground I began to sense the reason for Marique's strange behavior. You could not get rid of the feeling of being constantly watched, of destroying something magic, of unleashing a catastrophe. Would the entrances suddenly close? Would my flash ignite a synchronized laser beam? Would we never see the light of day again? Childish ideas for men engaged on serious investigation? Perhaps. But if you had experienced what it was like down there, you would understand these absurd ideas. Teams equipped with modern technical aids will have to work down there to see whether there are any dangers to be overcome or avoided. When I first saw the pile of gold, I begged to be allowed to take just one photo. Once again I was refused. The lumps of gold had to be levered from the pile, and that might make a noise and start stones falling from the roof like an avalanche. Mariques noticed my frustration and laughed. "You will be able to photograph plenty of gold later, but not in such vast quantities. Will that do?" Today I know that the biggest treasure from the dark tunnels is not on show in South American museums. It lies in the back patio of the Church of Maria Auxiliadora at Cuenca in Ecuador, some 8,100 feet above sea level. Father Crespi, the collector of the treasure, which is priceless just for its weight in gold, has been living in Cuenca for 45 years. He is accepted as a trustworthy friend of the Indians, who during past decades fetched the most valuable gold, silver, and metal objects from their hiding places piece by piece and gave them to him, and still do so today. I had been warned beforehand that the good father was fond of pulling his visitors' legs. I soon had a taste of this. In all seriousness, he showed me an object that was obviously the lower part of a flat iron. "Look," he said, "that proves that Inca rulers had their trousers pressed even in those days." We laughed, and Father Crespi led us through his treasure chambers. Room 1 houses stonemason's work. Room 2 contains Inca artifacts of gold, silver, copper, and brass, while Room 3 holds the gold treasure, which he very seldom shows anyone, and then unwillingly. Cuenca has a gold museum of its own, but it cannot compare with Father Crespi's. The showpiece was a steel 20.5 inches high, 5.5 inches wide, and 1.5 inches thick. 56 different characters are stamped onto its 56 squares. I had seen absolutely identical characters on the leaves in the metal library in the Great Hall. Whoever made this metal steel used a code, an alphabet, with 56 letters or symbols arranged to form writing. What makes this all the more remarkable is the fact that hitherto it has always been claimed that the South American cultures, Incas, possessed no alphabetical writing or script with alphabetical characteristics. "Have you seen this lady?" asked Mariquez. She was 12.5 inches high and naturally of solid gold. Her head was formed of 2 triangles, whose planes seemed to have wings welded to them. Coiled cables emerged from her ears. They were obviously not jewelry, for the lady's earrings were clipped to her earlobes. She had healthy, if triangular, proportions, with well-formed breasts, and stood with legs apart. The fact that she had no arms did not mar her beauty. She wore long, elegant trousers. A sphere floated above her head, and I felt that the stars on either side referred to her origin. A star from a past age? A maiden from the stars. Next came a brass discus, 8.5 inches in diameter. It cannot have been a shield, as the archaeologists would catalogue it. For one thing, it is too heavy. For another, it has never had a handhold on its smooth reverse side. I believe that this discus, too, was intended to transmit information. It exhibits 2 stylized but incredibly accurate spermatozoa, 2 laughing suns, the sickle of a waning moon, a large star, and 2 stylized triangular men's faces. In the middle are small raised circles, arranged to give the beholder visual pleasure, but apparently intended to produce a different and more serious effect. Father Crespi put a heavy copper plaque in front of the camera. "Here is something special for you, my young friend. This piece dates to the period before the flood." 3 creatures, holding a tall tablet with some signs on it, stared at me. The pairs of eyes looked as if they were peering from behind goggles. The upper left-hand monster pointed to a sphere. The right-hand one was clad from head to foot in an overall, which was fastened at the sides, and proudly wore a 3-cornered star on his head. Above the tablet with signs floated 2 winged spheres. What were the monsters holding? Some kind of Morse code? Dots? Dashes? SOSs? A switchboard for electric contacts? Anything is possible. But I suspect technical analogies rather than letters on this tablet, and according to the Father, who has been given special Vatican permission to carry out his archaeological research, it does date to the period before the flood. Take my word for it, when you catch sight of the treasures in the back patio of Maria Auxiliadora, you have to be very strong-willed not to get gold-drunk. But it was not the large amounts of gold that impressed me. It was the representation of stars, moons, suns, and snakes that gleamed on hundreds of metal plaques, nearly all of them unequivocal symbols of space travel. I picked some exceptionally photogenic examples of such pictures out of what is presumably the lost heritage of the Incas, who were very familiar with the snake sign, and used it decoratively in representations of their ruler, the Son of the Sun. Here they are. A relief with a pyramid. The steep sides are bordered by snakes. There are 2 suns, 2 astronaut-like monsters, 2 deer-like animals, and some circles with dots in them. Do the circles indicate the number of space travelers buried inside the pyramid? Another plaque with a pyramid. 2 jaguars.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?